Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
Fellas, you know Degree Cool Rush deodorant, right? Well, last year they changed the formula, and guys were mad about it. One dude even started a petition. So guess what? Degree heard us, admitted they messed up, and brought the original Cool Rush scent back exactly how it was. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So grab some and remember why its cool, crisp, and fresh scent made it the #1 men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory for all of us.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku. And it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
EVO. This series contains adult language and depictions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. They came with the rivers, long before the towers rose from the prairie or railroads etched their destiny into the mud, long before steel screamed from smokestacks and dreams burned in alley fires. This land was a meeting place, Chicagua, the wild garlic field. The Potawatomi called it home. They moved silently through tall grasses and marshes, their canoes gliding across the vast inland waters that shimmered like mirrors of time. Here at the edge of Lake Michigan, a city would be born, not gently, not slowly, but in fire and blood, rising from ash with a roar that would echo across a continent. In 1673, French explorers Joliet and Marquette pushed through the wilderness, mapping a new world. They found native trails and waterways that would become roads and canals. They marked the place where commerce would someday explode, where wagons gave way to rail cars and trade gave way to industry. In 1837, Chicago was incorporated, a muddy trading post of 4,000 souls. Within 50 years, it would be home to over 1 million. But with growth came tension. As immigrants flooded in from Ireland, Germany, Poland, Italy, and beyond, the city strained. Ethnic enclaves flourished, unions battled capitalists, and the poor lived in tenements barely fit for animals. Chicago was a place of hope and hardship, where fortunes could be made and lives could be lost in the same breath. Then came the fire. October 8th, 1871, a barn, a spark, and the city burned for 2 days. Flames swallowed 17,000 buildings and left 100,000 people homeless. Yet out of that devastation came reinvention. Architects descended, drawing lines of beauty into the sky. The Chicago School of Architecture was born, and the skyline would become the envy of the world. But not all structures were built with brick and vision. Some were built with bone and fear. As the 20th century turned, Chicago evolved into the city of broad shoulders, as Carl Sandburg wrote. But it also became a city of shadows. Prohibition gave rise to the mafia, and Al Capone made blood flow in the streets like whiskey from an open tap. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre, bootleggers, crooked cops. Chicago became synonymous with power, corruption, and organized crime. The city had swagger. But behind the bravado, something darker stirred. The mid-century brought the highways. The expressways cut through communities like razors. White flight drained the city's heart, while high-rises penned the poor. Urban renewal uprooted history, but Chicago kept pushing forward, building, dreaming, hurting, and healing. And in the 1970s, a man named John Wayne Gacy moved quietly through Norwood Park Township. He hosted barbecues, he ran a construction business, he entertained children as Pogo the Clown. But under his modest home at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue, the bones told a different story. Gacy murdered 33 young men and boys, many of them runaways or forgotten souls he lured with promises of work. He raped them, tortured them, and buried them in the crawl space under his house, layer upon layer of lives erased. The community was stunned. How could this happen here, in a tidy suburb of America's heartland? Gacy was convicted in 1980 and executed in 1994, but the scars he left behind, on families, on a city, on a nation, never healed. And his story didn't end with his death, because while Gacy rotted in prison, others were listening. A young man named Robin Gecht had once worked for Gacy in his construction company. Maybe he saw too much, maybe he was already broken, but not long after Gacy's arrest, a new darkness began to rise in Chicago, one that made even seasoned detectives recoil. Gecht wasn't alone. He recruited 3 followers, Edward Spreitzer and brothers Andrew and Thomas Kokorelis. Together, they became what the press would call the Chicago Rippers. Welcome back to The Devil Within. You're listening to the Chicago Rippers. They cruised the streets in a van. They picked up women, mostly sex workers. They brought them to a secret room or the back of the vehicle. What they did next defied comprehension. They raped, mutilated, tortured, and, in some cases, surgically removed the breasts of living women. They were said to chant. They were said to pray to a dark altar Gecht kept in his attic. Some said they drank blood. Others claimed they preserved body parts for rituals. And still others, those who hunted them, believed it was no coincidence that Gecht once knew Gacy. Was it just another case of evil finding evil? Or had Gacy inspired something deeper? In 1982, the Rippers were caught. The details of their crimes were buried in court records and forgotten headlines, overshadowed by the spectacle of Gacy's trial. But for those who remembered, the question lingered. Was Gacy the beginning, or merely a link in a chain of unholy descent? Today, Chicago glitters again. Its lakefront pulses with life. Its neighborhoods sing in dozens of languages. But history is never still. Underneath the beauty and bustle, the soil remembers. And sometimes in the flicker of a street lamp or the echo of a scream carried on the wind, the city whispers its truth. Not all monsters die in the light. Some leave seeds behind. If you walk the streets of Chicago with your eyes open, you can feel it. The layered memory of a city that has seen too much. It's in the soot beneath the viaducts. It's in the half-told stories passed from bar stools to back alleys. And if you listen long enough, you might hear the whisper of something worse than fire, worse than Capone, worse even than John Wayne Gacy. Because some men don't just commit evil. Some men worship it. In the late summer of 1981, that evil began to surface in brutal fragments. Bodies found in ditches, vacant lots, and shallow grave sites across Cook and DuPage counties. The first to shake the conscience of law enforcement was Linda Sutton, a 26-year-old mother whose mutilated body was discovered in a field near a motel in Villa Park on May 23, 1981. She had been tortured, raped, and her left breast had been removed surgically. The crime scene was unlike any local investigators had encountered: clinical, sadistic, and ritualistic. Weeks later, another woman was found, then another. In each case, the victims shared a horrifying signature: violent sexual assault, followed by post-mortem mutilation of the chest and breasts. Many were missing for days before being dumped, discarded as if they were never meant to be found. By early 1982, detectives from multiple jurisdictions began comparing notes. The similarities were impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the brutality, it was the precision. The incisions appeared almost surgical. These weren't impulsive killings, they were planned, ritualized. It was then that the phrase no department wants to utter took root. Serial killer. Only this time, it would turn out to be worse. This time, there wasn't just one killer. There was a brotherhood of 4. At the center of the nightmare stood Robin Gecht. Born in Illinois in 1953, Gecht cut an unassuming figure, quiet, average-looking, working class. But behind his pale eyes simmered a violent fantasy life rooted in pornography, Satanism, and surgical mutilation. He was obsessed with breasts, fixated to the point of pathology. His attic, neighbors would later testify, was decorated like a perverse chapel, complete with black walls, red lighting, and a homemade altar where he led satanic rituals. Gecht was married, with children, and maintained a job in construction, and he worked, as stated, for a brief period under John Wayne Gacy. Whether Gacy's abject cruelty influenced him or merely confirmed Gecht's own monstrous instincts is unclear. But Gecht's trajectory from low-level worker to cult-like figurehead remains one of the most chilling aspects of the case. Gecht possessed a magnetic control over others. He didn't act alone. In the early 1980s, he surrounded himself with a trio of disturbed young men who had come to believe in his twisted dogma and follow his lead into hell. They were Edward Spreitzer, Andrew Kokoraleis, and Thomas Kokoraleis. Edward Spreitzer was the youngest of the group, just 19 when the murders began. Raised in a troubled home on the northwest side of Chicago, he dropped out of school early and drifted into petty crime. Spreitzer was impressionable and insecure, exactly the kind of personality Gecht could dominate. Under Gecht's influence, he transformed from a timid delinquent into a participant in rape, torture, and dismemberment. In confessions later obtained by police, Spreitzer would describe Gecht's power over him in religious terms, as if Gecht were more than human. Andrew Kokoraleis, born in 1963, was the middle child of a devout Greek Orthodox family from Elmhurst, a western suburb of Chicago. Though quiet and polite in his youth, he was plagued by severe learning disabilities and behavioral problems. In adolescence, he drifted from his family's teachings into a world of criminal mischief. When he met Gecht, he found a father figure, albeit a monstrous one. Gecht gave him a sense of purpose and initiation into a brotherhood. Andrew would later confess to holding women down while they were tortured and to personally disposing of bodies like trash on the side of the road. Thomas Kokoraleis, Andrew's older brother, was born in 1960 and shared many of his brother's developmental issues. Known as slow and easily manipulated, Thomas fell into Gecht's orbit through Andrew. His participation in the crimes was less hands-on than the others, but no less culpable. He helped lure victims, stood watch during rituals, and aided in cleanup. He would later attempt to downplay his role, claiming fear and ignorance, but victim statements and co-conspirator confessions placed him squarely at the heart of the horror. Together, these four men formed a murder cult, bound by a belief system of blood, sex, and sacrifice. Gecht preached that pain could unlock spiritual power, that sexual violence was an act of ritual purification, and that Satan demanded offerings. Each mutilation, each severed breast was not only a crime, it was to them a sacrament. The others followed blindly, desperate for approval, afraid to question.
Impact confirmed. The Slayer has been activated.
Demonic threat level increasing.
Hold the line!
All the power of hell cowering before one man.
id Software presents Doom, The Dark Ages. Available now on Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5, and PC.
Rated M for mature.
Get ready for Universal Epic Universe, featuring the wizarding world of Harry Potter, Ministry of Magic, and Super Nintendo World. Now open at Universal Orlando Resort. Tickets and packages on sale now at universalorlando.com.
This episode is brought to you by MeUndies. Underwear drawers are like the Wild West. You never know what you're going to pull out or what shape it's in. So upgrade your collection with the buttery soft comfort of MeUndies. MeUndies' signature fabric is as soft as a warm hug from your favorite sweater. Plus, it's breathable and oh so comfy, making it ideal for all-day wear. Get 20% off your first order, plus free shipping at MeUndies.com/Spotify with code SPOTIFY. That's MeUndies.com/Spotify, code SPOTIFY.
We off? 30 seconds of carefree bliss.
Oof, like wind in your hair carefree.
Oh, like using Clorox Disinfecting All-Purpose Cleaner in the home carefree.
Yes!
Like Doc slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox Carefree?
He's on a roll now.
Spit toothpaste on the faucet?
You got it. You got it.
Peanut butter on the light switch.
Oh, spritz, spritz.
Spritz, spritz. Clorox, man. Clean feels good.
Okay, we're back.
Use as directed.
In many ways, the Chicago Rippers were not just a gang of killers. They were the embodiment of something deeper, more ancient. Ritualized, systemic evil cloaked in the mundane camouflage of working-class life. They clocked in and out of menial jobs, returned to their apartments, nodded politely to neighbors, and then climbed into a van to hunt women for sacrifice. Their bond wasn't forged in loyalty or greed. It was forged in fantasy and fear. A perverse sense of belonging that only grew stronger with every act of depravity. And behind it all was Gecht, watching, directing, and leading them into the abyss. It was nothing special to look at, a brown 1978 Dodge tradesman van, worn around the edges with dull paint and windows coated in dust and road film. In a city as vast and bruised as Chicago, vehicles like it passed by unnoticed every minute of every day. Delivery trucks, contractor vans, union workers in transit. The van blended in like background noise. But this van didn't carry drywall or plumbing tools. It carried instruments of ritual. And for a year, it would become the most terrifying sanctuary on wheels in Illinois. The Rippers referred to it only as the van. To the women who entered it, it became a chamber of torment, a final destination they never intended to reach. Inside, it was meticulously, diabolically prepared. A narrow mattress was laid across the floor, covered in cheap vinyl that was easy to clean. Duct tape, handcuffs, and rope were stashed in a tool compartment beneath the bench seat. In one corner, a small tackle box contained scalpels, razor blades, medical scissors, and X-Acto knives. The rear doors were reinforced with inner locks, ensuring that once closed, They couldn't be opened from the inside. Sound was muffled by layers of insulation stapled to the ceiling. Screams were swallowed by the upholstery and the hum of the engine. The ritual would begin with a drive, long, slow laps through Cicero Avenue, Lawrence Avenue, or South Halsted, areas known for prostitution, especially in the early 80s, as Reagan-era economic hardship gripped the city. The Rippers weren't prowling for pleasure. They were hunting, choosing their victims with care. Vulnerability was key. Women with no fixed address, sex workers with no regular customers, runaways with no one looking for them. Gecht often played the role of the driver, the recruiter. He was calm, confident, polite. He'd offer a good rate, $75, sometimes $100 for a quick date, and most women, especially in winter, would climb in. Once inside, Gecht would pass them a soft drink or a cup of coffee laced with tranquilizers. If that failed, brute force followed. The doors locked, the van swerved into a darkened alley or underpass, and the others would emerge from hiding in the back. What followed was not a frenzy of chaos, but a coordinated ritual. The victim would be stripped, bound, and positioned on the mattress, sometimes blindfolded, sometimes gagged. The men took turns raping her. And then Gecht would begin his ritual. He'd read from a Bible-like text, a mutilated version of occult writing blended with Catholic phrasing and pornographic imagery. With the others kneeling or standing silently, Gecht would chant, invoking Satan or the Dark Lord. Then, using one of his knives, he would begin the mutilation, always focused on the breasts. According to later testimony, the removal was methodical. Precise incisions, again, almost surgical. Gecht didn't stab wildly. He dissected. He took his time. He wanted the victim alive during the procedure. Their pain was part of the offering. The severed tissue would be placed in a bag or box. Sometimes victims died during the assault. Some were suffocated or strangled afterwards. Others were driven, bleeding, to remote stretches of forest preserves, abandoned lots, or along highways like Route 83 or I-55, and dumped like garbage. Naked, mutilated, drained of life and dignity. It wasn't just murder. It was sacrifice. In the van was their altar. At least 18 women were believed to have met this fate between May of 1981 and October of 1982. But investigators suspected the number could be far higher. The transient nature of many victims, the absence of forensic DNA, and the disposal methods made it difficult to confirm. Some victims were never identified. Others were only found because wild animals had disturbed the burial sites. One case, however, broke the pattern. Beverly Washington, just 20 years old, was working the streets in early December of 1982 when she was approached by the brown van. She agreed to the terms, drank the spiked soda, and passed out. When she awoke, she was bound. They raped her, mutilated her, and threw her from the van near a railroad track in Villa Park. They thought she was dead. But Beverly lived. Bleeding, disoriented, one breast hacked away, she crawled to safety, flagged down help, and became the only known survivor to provide a detailed description of the van, her attackers, and their methods. Her survival wasn't just a miracle. It was the beginning of the end for the Chicago Rippers. The van, once a symbol of anonymity, became a liability. Police issued a description to patrol units and began canvassing mechanics, used car lots, and commercial vehicle registries. Witnesses, gas station attendants, street informants, and prostitutes, began reporting sightings. And then came the first break. A local informant tipped off police about Edward Spreitzer, a young man known to drive a brown Dodge van and associated with a man named Gecht. When police brought him in, they found him shaking. Within hours, he confessed. Through his confession and those of the Kokoraleis brothers, the police were able to recover photographs, murder implements, and most importantly, the van itself, which still held forensic traces of blood and tissue. The mattress, the scalpels, the bindings. It was a mobile crime scene soaked in unspeakable acts, a death wagon that had moved freely for over a year through the arteries of a city oblivious to its cargo. To the press, it would become the van of death. To the survivors and families of the victims, it was something worse. A sanctuary of evil that looked like just another vehicle on the road. Leading the charge were investigators from the Chicago Police Department and DuPage County Sheriff's Office, particularly Detective Herb Passion and Detective Joseph McCarthy. Quiet professionals, they combed through medical reports, autopsy photos, and toxicology results. They cross-referenced license plates, scoured prostitution stings, and pulled every favor they had on the street. It was hard work. There were no cameras, no cell phones, just old-fashioned detective work. But slowly, a picture emerged. When Edward Spreitzer cracked under pressure and confessed to everything, he gave them names, dates, and even described the ceremonies that Gecht conducted. Then came the Kokoraleis brothers, Andrew first, then Thomas. Both gave chilling details. They described Gecht's satanic Bible, the attic altar, and the surgical kits. And still, through it all, Robin Gecht denied everything. He smiled through interviews. He shrugged at allegations. And thanks to slick lawyering and a lack of forensic evidence tying him directly to a murder, he avoided a murder conviction. He was found guilty of rape and aggravated battery and sentenced to 120 years in prison. The others weren't so lucky. Edward Spreitzer was convicted of murder and sentenced to death, later commuted to life without parole after Illinois abolished the death penalty. Andrew Kokoraleis was executed in 1999, becoming the last person put to death in the state of Illinois. Thomas Kokoraleis was sentenced to 70 years, but after serving just over half that time, he was released in 2019. A free man once more, to the horror of the victims' families and the public. The story of the Chicago Rippers faded quickly. Unlike Gacy, there was no high-profile trial, no media circus, just courtrooms, sentences, and sealed doors. Their victims, many of them marginalized women, didn't draw headlines. The city moved on. But for those who knew, for those who remembered, the story was more than just another true crime tragedy. It was a warning. Because what made the Rippers unique wasn't just the cruelty. It was the ritual, the belief. These weren't crimes of passion or convenience. They were acts of worship. Gecht had turned murder into liturgy, mutilation into sacrament, and in that, he had forged something worse than a serial killer. He had forged a cult. How many others followed him quietly? How many were drawn to his altar and turned away before blood was spilled? How many minds did he touch, infect, and reshape? We'll never know. What remains are bodies, some still unidentified, families, some still waiting for answers, and a city forever changed. Today, Chicago pulses as it always has. Its streets teem with laughter and traffic, jazz and sirens. It's a city of food and grit, of resilience and swagger. But somewhere, not far from a busy intersection, there's a brownstone where an attic once held an altar. Somewhere in a drawer, a case file yellowed by time holds autopsy photos too terrible to publish. And somewhere, beneath it all, Chicago remembers. Because evil doesn't always arrive with horns and fanfare. Sometimes it slips through a back door. Sometimes it wears a hard hat. Sometimes it carries a knife in one hand and a Bible in the other. And sometimes, just sometimes, it leaves behind followers. Thanks for listening to The Devil Within. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with your friends. Head on over to Apple Podcast or Spotify and rate and review the show, or maybe leave me a comment. This episode was the idea from a listener who emailed at info@evocreative.com with some ideas. I'll shout him out in the next episode. And in the meantime, I'd appreciate a follow at The Devil Within Pod on Instagram. You may have noticed I've started posting, finally. Again, thanks for listening, and until next time, stay safe out there. The Devil Within is an EVO production, recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. For The Devil Within, I'm your host, Brandon Morgan.